Welcome to the latest edition of the 4020 Rugby League podcast. Because it's 2 days after Wembley, Phil, you finished the magazine. It's done. You've written all the words.
All the words are done, most of them in the right place. Some of them matched up with the pictures. Yes, it's the busiest weekend of the year in terms of late content that has to be fitted in, but all being well, it's all there and currently on a printer as we speak.
I'm going to ask you questions that I already know the answer to, but that's how this thing works. How was Wembley for you?
Well, I think we should start with a great unanswered question. And that is, why did Leicester Forest East Services have no beef burgers after 10 o'clock at night? How can you call yourself Burger King if you haven't got any burgers?
And why does the Starbucks leave itself open to pilfering from ne'er-do-wells? Not us. We went on to Donington Park, but
Whatever happened to the 24-hour society? That's what I want.
well, apparently it's the Costa at Donington and the Dewitt Smiths, but that's it. That's all the 24-hour society
now. I thought that in terms of raw emotion and the reason why we were there and what was being celebrated, Wembley was about as good as you could have hoped. I thought the people that brought the mementos to the statue, the manner in which Rob Burrows' name was commemorated in all the games, what most people said in the lead up to the matches and certainly afterwards, particularly Daryl Powell, who I thought summed up brilliantly for all of us as to why we were there and what actually mattered, and it wasn't the scores in the games. That was great, and I wouldn't have missed it for the world. In terms of the three matches, I think probably they weren't quite as good as that. There wasn't a huge amount of jeopardy in any of them. I think certainly two of the sides didn't show their best face in the men's and women's games. And in the third game, there was that question that now needs to be asked about whether full-time teams should take on part-time teams on a pitch as wide as that. But again, I go back to what we were talking about on the way there and the way back, and why perhaps the attendance was the highest it's been for 7 years. It was all about Rob, and I would like to think that the family thought that his memory was done justice.
Yeah, it'd be unfair to criticise Sheffield despite being beaten by the widest margin in the three finals, but we'll come on to those in a moment. As you say, as an event, it worked, it clicked, and people will always criticise the fact that it's a triple header, even though it's not, it's a quadruple header. But as an event, as a day, it flowed nicely, and I missed the tributes before the men's final because I was down in the tunnel speaking to the victorious St Helens players, but the minute's applause, the minute's silence, impeccable, and all that kind of stuff. And I think the tone was right. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, I think the fact that the teams all pay tribute to Rob in their warm up tops, and that
and
was
the match officials,
lovely touch. And so yeah, I think in terms of maybe why we were there, his name sort of being on the and on a ring around the stadium and on the LED lights, and the two banners that were put up before Abide With Me prior to the men's game, that probably was the highlight image for me of the whole weekend. So whoever organised that and got it done in time, and even the symbolism of the two rival sets of fans in that game, opposite ends coming together for something that was bigger than them. I don't think we should underestimate that. We do that as a sport really well. Yes, I thought if we talk about the individual games, then there was something probably missing from all three of them. But what wasn't was the sentiment of all the people that were there. So, some of whom I think just did go to be part of that occasion. Maybe not many of them, but certainly, if you look at the number of shirts of different clubs that were placed around the statue, they were then taken back up to Leeds, and Leeds then issued a statement saying, was it 668 different professional community clubs had left the shirt there in tribute? Well, an extremely sad week, but that's what we can do and what we do well. And I think there were links as well with with the teams. Again, we can talk about the games, but to hear Bevan French in his man of the match acceptance talking about why it was an emotional week for him because his mum had passed away for MND. I thought there were so many links of so many clubs. Obviously, Sam Burgess talking about caring for his father who also passed away with MND. I don't think we lost sight of why we were really there, and I'm sure that there were 3 sets of fans travelling up the motorway trying to look for a burger, unable to find it, that would have been bemoaning the fact that their team perhaps didn't give of what we know to be their best. But I can't get away from this fact that maybe that's the reason. That wasn't the reason we were there.
It's amazing how quickly the staff at Wembley turned things around. Obviously, the England international the night before, which now probably England wishing they hadn't played, having lost to Iceland. But it's a good job they've got all those LED boards because it does save you having to put bits of wood up with Betfred on. But the tribute on the pitch, the big number 7, which when you're there, you can't really see, but on telly, it looks perfect. I don't know how they do that. I mean, that's some kind of wizardry and magic, but it was as an occasion, as an event, as the way it looked. Well, the way it looked good. People at home will say, well, it didn't look good because there's all those empty seats and stuff, but 67,000, they were hoping for 70, weren't they? That was John Davidson's story earlier in the week. But with everything else that goes on, and we were talking about this on the way back as well, you've got, obviously, the Challenge Cup final it used to be the big event. Neutrals did not go to the Premiership final or the Championship final before, or they didn't have Magic Weekend. There wasn't a trip to France or Cornwall on the horizon. There's also other things outside of Rugby League you can spend your money on. Could have gone to UK's Strongest Man, which was on Channel 5, or the Rugby Union Premiership final. I don't know why you go to that. Apparently to praise Lee Radford. Or the baseball. I don't know if there's anyone at the baseball used to be involved in Rugby League. There's plenty of things in London. And if you say, well, we shouldn't play the final in London because it's expensive. You move the final to St James's Park, and I'm sure all those who used to book hotels for Magic Weekend, as soon as they could work out when the dates were, would have seen the prices immediately go up from what they would normally be, because that's what happens whether you're in Newcastle or Manchester or Liverpool or Leeds or wherever. So wherever the final is, it's going to cost money in terms of traffic, in terms of traveling, or traffic as well, in terms of travel or hotels or whatever. So I don't know. Wembley's not perfect, but it has the history.
I think 2 things on that. One is touches on exactly what you just said there, that everybody we spoke to, be they players, the occasional fans, but certainly the staff and the coaches, they would not swap that Wembley experience for anything. Mark Aston is as passionate about taking his team to Wembley, however full the stadium is when the 1895 Cup is played. And had a chat with Keith Senior afterwards as well. He's been to Wembley. He's played in big occasions as a player, but I think as an assistant coach, you want to be running out onto Wembley. Now, for some of these players and fans, it might be the biggest day they have. So that's one thing. You can't take it away, because the people to whom it really matters value it immensely. I think the other event that was on over the weekend in London that I hadn't considered, again, might be a distraction. And what we must say is there's always going to be events on in London. That's probably why it's the capital of the nation. Was Soccer Aid. Again, that was played at Chelsea. It was a sellout. There was a lot of hype surrounding it in the days up to it. If you're only going to go to one event in a weekend, that might be the one you chose this weekend. There's always going to be competing attractions. But I think it is important that we go to Wembley, that we're on the mainstream BBC channels, and that as a sport we can. I think that the shame this time was that the games probably wouldn't have captured the imagination of the neutral enough, because at no point did they look like they were anything other than foregone conclusion items. I think, the women's game, I suspect, was over very early in the second half, but if you were there, you probably thought Hannah Butcher hadn't made that amazing try-saving tackle at the end of the first half. It could have been over then. I think the men's game, Wigan scoring twice in 4 minutes, round about the quarter way mark. I couldn't see a way back from for Warrington from that moment, and we can talk about why that might have been. And again, the 1895 Cup, there's a try just before and just after half time, and then the outcome of the game. So none of those matches had enough in them to keep a neutral sat there if they really wanted to see a compelling and competitive contest. But I'm not, again, for this week and this week only, I'm not sure that's why we were there. So we can talk about the whys. But I thought it was a decent turnout. The sun shone for a lot of it. It'd be nice if the M1 motorway got to more than 50 mile an hour for 3/4 of it. That may have affected some. We were in the service station at what on the down. I forget the time. I think it would have been 8, half 8. There were already loads of Wigan and Warrington fans there, and their game didn't kick off till obviously 3. They were going down to make a weekend of it. So I think we owe it to those who go to keep going with it. There is something really special about it.
There's no neutral buying to going to Anfield or whatever, but that's just is what it is.
And again, credit to the RFL that we've said in the past, and the national game, which isn't full under their control. We don't publicise enough. We don't put tickets on sale early enough. No sooner we've got back than the emails out saying the date's set for next year. It's the same weekend. There's early bird ticket offers. There isn't a huge amount more that as a governing body they can do. People are going to say, "Oh yeah, they could market it better," and actually, it's only really aimed at us. But no excuses. More of us should go.
And it's not as if, as you say, the tickets aren't expensive. I know there's everything else on top of it. It's never going to be cheap to stay in London. Stay outside London. They've actually got good transport links. Obviously, in the north, where transport links are a hot topic at the moment, and probably won't be on July the 5th as much as they are on July the 4th. But it's much easier to get to and out of London and near London than it is to. I mean, it's easy for us to say, Phil, because we don't pay for the tickets, and your parking was expensive. That was a positive, and the half scarf, which I realise I should have got receipts for both of those, but I'm not sure they do receipts. Which
I can get you a petty cash slip. Write your own.
The HMRC accept that. Let's move on. The men's well, no, let's go chronologically. We'll start with the women. St Helens 22, Leeds 0. Saints are just really good, and in defence is where they are spectacular, and this is where the play of the match voting. I say, and for a start, let's say still, because it's easy to bang drums that are easy to bang. Why is it not named after someone? This is the second year at Wembley. I think we've mentioned this for a few years now. What the 1895 Cup final, which, to use a phrase I know you hate, Phil, it is what it is. But it's got a play of the match trophy named after someone who people know. Why is the Women's Challenge Cup player of the match not named after someone? It's just the player of the match.
Well, you've had Julia Lee on the pod last week talking about the pioneers of the women's games. There's plenty of people you could name it after.
Name it after a couple, name it after 3, name it after whatever you want. It's easily done. Zoe Harris won that. But I think the game was won, and this is not to take anything away from her. I think the game was won on their defence, wasn't it? And to not concede a point at Wembley, that is quite impressive.
It was almost a mirror of last year's game, wasn't it? That Leeds had all of the possession and the pressure in the first 10 minutes, couldn't make it count. Saints ensured they couldn't make it count because their scramble defence was so good. They then go up the other end and score, and the confidence drains out of Leeds. And I think that Leeds needed to score first, I think. They just couldn't get the ball down. Couldn't gather it in and force it down when the kick was very Sahili. I think if Leeds had gone ahead having had that pressure, then I'm not saying the outcome would have been different. I just think Saints would have been able to still rely on their defence to stay in the game, but they'd also have had to come up with something to score at the other end. I thought too many of the Leeds players looked weighed down by the expectation of having to perform for something greater than themselves. They may not see it that way, and they may not even have realised at the time how much of a millstone that turned out to be. But clearly, everything was pointing to the fact that you have to do it for Rob. It's impossible. You have to do it for yourselves. You have to play well on the day. But they seemed inhibited. And again, the minute you say that, you're saying, "Oh well, yeah, but you're not paying enough credit to St Helens." I mean, I've just seen Jodie Cunningham's stats have just come up. 338 run meters in the game. In any game of rugby league, that is an absolutely ridiculous amount of work. 39 carries. Again, that's astonishing. And 30 tackles. That is a workload that is worthy of a Player of the Match award on its own in any match. And she wasn't one of the people that were, well, she may have been considered, but it's the halfbacks. Faye Gaskin took the eye. And had I been given a vote, I would have given it to Faye and not Zoe Harris. And I thought Faye's try infused Saints with everything they then went on to do. And she was obviously involved in getting the ball out for Phoebe Hook's try just before half time. So I know Zoe gave the final pass, but I thought Faye's game management was absolutely fantastic. And clearly we didn't hear her speech to the television after the game, but catching up on all that yesterday about that's her last Challenge Cup game and she's retiring to go and have IVF treatment, and people in the men's game don't fully understand that. I don't think we have any appreciation of the difference in biology in the women's game and how that needs to be a factor when we talk about it. No, Saints were too good. In a mirror of what we'll probably say about Warrington, too many of the Leeds senior players that would normally set the lead didn't make a mark on the game, and I think there was pressure on Caitlin Casey wearing that number 7 shirt, and for whatever reason, she seemed overawed by the whole event. I think second half Leeds made one really good break by Lucy Murray and couldn't capitalise on it. They're kicking early and straight to a St Helens player, and it didn't work for them at any level. And Saints were absolutely brilliant. And you're 100% correct. Brilliant based on a magnificent defence that we've now come to acknowledge is on its day is impossible to break down. The big question for Saints now is, can they take that into the Super League, which they didn't do last year.
I think I've been interviewing people after matches for. Well, I don't think I know. 2002 is when I started doing this kind of thing. That's the first time I've ever had anyone mention IVF before. We're all learning about this new world of stuff that we didn't have to think about before. It's fascinating and scary because it's easy just to say, "Oh, how do you think the performance went?" and without having to think about the real world. Jodie Cunningham, you can almost now. This is a strange thing to say, but because she's so consistent and has been consistent in many different positions on the field, you forget how good she is. As you say, the stats have borne that out. She's almost at that level of a James Roby or a Liam Farrell, who will come on to later, who are consistently good, so much so that you don't notice it. And she's hungry. Manny Smith's hungry. The whole squad's hungry, as you say, to go on and win that Super League title. And I think the fact that they were, I don't think "poor's" the right word for the second half of last season, but their eye was off the ball or whatever. That hunger, I think, will spur them on. And obviously, York have got their injuries at the moment. Leeds have got many things to think about. You put Saints in pole position with Wigan, who, of course, are on a resurgence as well. So it's going to be an interesting second half to the season, and how York and Leeds also react to the disappointment. We know York were desperate to get to Wembley this year, didn't make it. And it's going to be difficult to knock off Saints now, I think, with that defence that everything is built on. As soon as they absorb that first 15, 20 minutes, difficult to see Leeds scoring after that. And that does seem to be the Saints' way. They soak up the pressure and then bang, here they go and they're off.
I think the other thing that struck me was something that Brian Noble said in his column in the magazine out on Friday, contractually obliged to say that. he said if you're going to win the big games, you don't necessarily want one person playing 10 out of 10. What you need is everybody playing 8 out of 10. And I think that's what Saints did. I think that's what Wigan did. That yes, you've got some people that when you look at the stats and you look at who scored the tries and you look at who controlled the game, there are standout players. Clearly, every time Bevan French touched the ball, you thought he's going to do something here, and not enough of the Warrington players did. But everybody in that Saints team, everybody in that Wigan team, if you were marking them, there's nobody below an 8. There might be a couple of 9s in there. That's why they win. For everyone that is at the absolute peak of their game, if it's only them, your team isn't going to win. And I think Saints have got that down pat now in the women's game. Wigan have got that in the men's game, and they can go into a final and they can put a Zach Eckersley in Wigan's case, and you're going to get 8 out of 10. They're not going to be overawed. Leeds looked like there might have been a couple of 7s, but there were possibly some 3s or 4s in there. And you're not going to win a major trophy if that happens.
Spoke to a couple of debutantes on the day, didn't we? Jermaine McGilvery later on at 36, and Barry Salihi, I think he's 18, maybe 19. So, a slight difference in age. I thought she did very well to come back from 2 early errors, which she admitted in the interview, and having a head taken off as well, which was an interesting call. I don't know if the disciplinary have ruled on that game yet. I know they have on the men's game.
They're doing the women's game Thursday.
So we'll see if there's any further punishment from that. But
I think there will be. And again, you can only contrast against the 2 games. But if the yellow cards were justified in the men's game, that certainly means there should have been one in the women's game, I think.
I didn't see the yellow cards because, like Arsene Wenger, I didn't see it. I was downstairs at that point. Tell me about those, Phil, because I didn't see that. I've not seen them back.
Well, first set of the game that Wigan were defending, Josh Fewlis is taking the ball into the line. He does slip. Mike Cooper is lining him up for a big hit, and shoulder led, but looking like he was going to wrap his arm if Josh Fewlis hadn't fallen. There is direct contact with the head. There is mitigation under the terms that we were told right at the very beginning of the season. Yellow card, and almost I would commend the referee for taking that decision, because the easiest thing to do would have been to say, "Oh, it's a big final. It's the first minute. He was slipping. Have a warning." Once he'd made that decision and followed the protocols, then obviously Warrington get a penalty, and in that set, they kick to Liam Marshall. He brings the ball away, pokes out of the line. Matt Duffy comes in, takes him across the top of the head. People will say no malice in it, no intention, but it's direct contact with the head. And once you've sin-binned one player almost less than 60 seconds before, it doesn't give you another avenue to go down other than following that same procedure. So I don't have too much of an issue with it if it's consistent. And in that respect, it was consistent. I think no doubt we'll go on and talk about state of origin we've seen in men's and women's games since we were last on, and there is an incident in the men's game that had a lot put to it. The topic of conversation after that and the 2 yellow cards in the men's final is, why aren't we altering the rules for the big occasions? That is a nonsense argument. I think it was our friend Mr. Davidson that said it best. At what point, if it's Origin, do you not go out with a pistol, shoot someone and go, well, that's all right because it's Origin? Like, there are rules. And as I say, we say a lot about, are they consistently being applied? Have they changed since the start of the season? And Chris Kendall, in consultation with Liam Moore, made a decision very early in the game where there was lots of emotion that they were going to punish a high tackle because that's what we're doing. I don't have a problem with that. And the fact that the next time it happened, they meted out the same. I don't have a problem with that. It's consistency. The fact that the disciplinary panel have sat and said no further action, that's fine. A sin bin can be sufficient. the shame was that raised the atmosphere in the stadium to absolute fever pitch. So we'd had, the emotion of the Abide With Me. We'd had the impeccably observed minute silence. We'd had then the crowd tend to go up on the back minute. We'd had two civilians in the first 3 minutes of play. The atmosphere, presumably just about as you were coming back from finishing your interview, it was immense, but it never hit that peak again, unfortunately.
We'll blame the fans for that because
you've got to give them something to shout about. And again, I've seen a lot of comments from ex-players on social media and watched back the tries and heard a bit of the comments from the analysts, and they're basically all saying wrong decision. And I think they were probably the right decision because they were consistent in them.
The world has changed. The game is not what it was, but that's in every sense of the word.
Yeah,
again, I say you go back to the 60s and you watch games with proper scrums and stuff. Can't hit people in the head anymore. But why would you want to hit people in the head deliberately?
Exactly.
You're going to do that, be a boxer or a mixed martial artist or something.
And I think the other thing, whilst we've debated, and obviously James will be the first to ask next time he's on, that it can't be related to the level of injury and merits. Neither of the people who were hit high missed the proportion of the game. They didn't fail an HA. So I think again the punishment probably did fit the crime on this occasion. In men's state, the incident caused Reece Walsh to miss the rest of the game. The sending off seemed absolutely appropriate in that.
Yeah, but he's got nice hair, you see,
and lovely. Yeah, hasn't he got that?
What we would call in the olden days, I guess, a pretty boy, and that means he's fair game to be hit in the head by some fella. So too woke. Well, like the there was one Wakefield fan who suggested that the BBC don't show the 1895 Cup final and do show the women's final because they're a woke far left organisation. The BBC there.
Yep.
This podcast very much centrist in its outlook. We'll take a break. I don't even know what that means. I've not watched any of the debates. We'll take a break. We'll come back with more on Warrington and Wigan. We'll give the 1895 Cup final the respect it deserves because it hasn't been given that. And I haven't even mentioned that article on the BBC website about the women's final, which was just dreadfully written. But I've missed the opportunity to do that now. So we'll be back in a few minutes to talk more. Well, a few minutes, 30 seconds or so. Unless you listen to the podcast, and then it's probably even less. Welcome back. You've not gone anywhere. My laptop is on its last legs, and it is this is an apt thing. It's stuck on 7% battery. I've got the charger plugged in, but it's stuck on 7%. I don't. I would go and take it and leave it down at Headingley, but they say no more physical things, just flowers now. So I don't know what a picture of an old laptop would look like in the books of remembrance that they'll be producing. And sounds like something exciting in terms of the stuff is going to be. They're going to do something with the stuff in the south stand, so we'll see what that is in the future. Back to Wigan and Warrington in a moment. Well, now in fact, I had a question earlier from a listener, and I've forgotten what it was, but it was pretty much along the lines of, how would you sum up this final? Were Wigan great? Were Warrington rubbish? Was it a bit of both? And I think, again, it's I don't know if it's the occasion got to Warrington. I don't know if that's fair, but Wigan, if I say they're boringly good, people think I'm saying they're boring to watch, but they're not. They're good to watch. They just keep winning. They've got the formula at the moment that works them in the way that Saints did it for years and Leeds did it for years. And this Wigan side at the moment, it's difficult to see them losing big games.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think they've got the big game mentality, and as yet Warrington haven't, and it may stand them in good stead for later in the year. And clearly that's something that Sam Burgess said, as you would expect him to, that they need to experience these kind of occasions to know how to handle them. The big names on the Warrington team were inhibited for some reason. So I thought George Williams tried to do too much himself. Thought Matt Duffy couldn't break through until very late on. There was no space for him to work in, and he seemed to get a little bit frustrated about that. I thought Matty Ashton got some terrible service, but also didn't have one of his most influential games. You looked at the Warrington pack, and we now have had some of the stats as well, and I don't think any of them, except maybe Danny Walker, overpowered their opposite number. So again, we'd looked at some of the games that they played this year, and people like Paul Vaughan, Ben Curry, they've been standouts this year, but they dropped too much ball or didn't manage to break through. Now all of that is down to the fact that Wigan were absolutely remorseless. You make a mistake in a big game, you only need to make one, and it can cost you a bit in a league match, and you'll either get play that team again somewhere down the line when it might matter more. But you can't do that in a cup final. And even though Warrington went 2-0 up, when they conceded 2 tries back to back, the second one on the back of a poor mistake that they'd made in their own 10-metre area, you just knew that the ingredients weren't there, and they will go away and they will look at it, and Sam will look at some of his players and go, yeah, I know they can do it on a weekly basis, and I know they can do it against maybe some lesser opposition when not everything's on the line. But do I now need to look at a couple of players that are proven and know how to handle that? Do I need to look at my youngsters and say they need a bit more development? But Wigan are already there. That everybody that played in that team knew exactly what their role was. They knew what the team game plan was. They were never going to panic if they were put under any form of pressure. They know how to attack through their defence. In Bevan French, they did have somebody that rose to the occasion and deserved Lance Todd Trophy winner, I thought, because he's a bums off seat man, and if he was giving you that impression in the crowd watching him, he was certainly putting doubt in the minds of the Warrington defenders. That was ably assisted by Harry Smith's kicking game. But Jai Field was far more influential at the back than Matt Duffy was, because I think Field was engineering space. Duffy was unable to find it. And I thought, the hookers that they've got, that interchange between Brad O'Neill and Cruz Leeming, the intensity doesn't drop. Patrick Mogo coming on, the intensity doesn't drop. Ethan Havard coming on offers you something different. And I thought the player who didn't get any Lance Todd Trophy votes, so again, you then think afterwards, who's had a really big impression on that game? But Luke Thompson was absolutely outstanding in the early stages. He was a monster, but coming back, everything's settled down. Everything's back to, I'll provide you with what you need, guys. There was no way Warrington were going to come back from that.
They've got this amazing mentality, haven't they, at Wigan? And we saw a couple of players suspended for the game, and you wouldn't have known. You would not have known they were missing a couple. But obviously, Zach Eckersley comes in. Was his 3rd or 4th game or something ridiculous?
Big game, I think.
Scores a try at Wembley.
But the other great thing about Zach Eckersley, I thought, was the very first ball he had, he actually dropped. And you were thinking, oh, yeah, they brought him in. The nerves are going to get to him. The next touch of the ball, he's following up a kick and he's scoring a try. And you go, yeah, that's why he's in the Wigan system. That's why they will have all decided, yeah, he'll make a mistake, but we'll bail him out with our defence. The next chance he gets, that if he hadn't been there, hadn't followed the kick, hadn't followed the instruction that they get, that never give up on a play, they wouldn't have scored. But he was there and he did. So what a good and credit to him, he was the first player out to the mix zone to do interviews. And did loads, particularly for his local newspaper, I believe, and Saddleworth Independent, for those who were wondering. And he was great. He was absolutely great. And clearly the one thing that this Wigan team have got, and it comes from Chris Radlinski and Matty Peat, is that Professor Chris Brooks, the president, who I thought gave a magnificent homily to Rob Burrow before the team even set off. They just have whatever culture is nailed down at the moment, and you don't get in a team unless you've got it, and you know what it is when you do get in a team, and it comes from the top. and it works, and they're not boring in any way whatsoever. They deserve every success that they get, and everybody else has got to be better if they're going to defeat them in a major final.
Press conferences are fascinating things I can't necessarily say properly. Because you're trying to work out what people are saying when they don't say something. And Matt Peake he seemed to be insinuating something in the early part of it about I think about the courage in the build-up. And you obviously put together a monthly magazine. You don't have to react to whatever's going on a day-by-day basis. Do you think, again, I'm holding my hands up here, and I could have got it completely wrong. I could be insinuating the wrong thing, but I think, was he thinking that Wigan perhaps weren't given enough, I don't know if credits in the build-up, but enough coverage in the build-up? It all seems to be about Warrington and their coach more than anything else, taking away the Rob Burrow stuff, of course.
Yeah, I think that it would have been naive of him to think otherwise, because as we all said in our previews, Sam Burgess is the talking point. He is the personality that the media outside of the game wanted to talk about, wanted to focus on, wanted to go down and film. And that, obviously, this mythology of what he did not mythology, because he did it in the NRL Grand Final, but also his stint with England Rugby Union, like it or not, scapegoat or not, it elevated his profile beyond the normal rugby league one. So there were a lot of people that were, obviously his old club Bath were playing in the rugby union final at the same time. So clearly there was going to be more focus on Warrington, and whether if 3 months into his novice coaching career he was going to win a trophy. That's a good story, and I could see why journalists would want to focus on that. I think maybe Matty Peake did think there'd been a little bit of maybe disrespect to his side, because not many people were pointing out that there was a nice article about if they won they'd hold all 4 cups, and they'd only be the 6th team to do that. But other than that, it almost was Warrington's final to lose rather than Wigan's to win. And maybe that was what he was hinting at, but I don't think he needs to worry. I think if his team can play as well as they did on that stage, and almost strangle the opposition before they had any chance to make an impact on the game, then his formula is fantastic. There are very few clubs. I suspect there might be maybe one, possibly 2, that have won the World Club Challenge at the start of a season and a grand final at the end of it. It's almost proved to be impossible. That's over here, not really in the NRL. But I think his team are on track to do it. And if they picked up the Challenge Cup in the middle of the season as well, wow, that, we should be paying tribute to them. But it's like everything. It's like you were saying earlier about, about Liam Farrell, that if you are consistently excellent, you don't get revered for being excellent. And that's why, again, Kevin Sinfield never won a Golden Boot award, because if you're very good in a very good team, you get taken for granted.
The all 4 cups thing, shouldn't they all be in the same season? I know it's like they're holding all the Grand Slam tennis tournaments at once, but if you don't win them within a calendar year, it's not the same
thing. Yeah, I think it's having only the the League Leaders Shield one technically, is last season, isn't it? The Super League is last season, but they currently in their when they're buying their Duraglit to polish the trophy, they've got them all.
And it's difficult to see them not going on to Old Trafford and winning again, despite the fact, obviously, that Warrington will learn from that experience as players and coaching staff as well.
I think it's too early to say. We're literally at the halfway point of the season. Injuries will play a factor. Fatigue will play a factor. Being in form when it really matters come the playoffs will matter. And I don't think we can judge that. What I think we can say is if Wigan are fully fit, and they go into that playoff in 1st or 2nd place in the league, it's going to take a hell of a performance to beat them.
And even if some of the players are still impaired by the time Matt Peake picks his squad on Friday night, you still fancy Wigan plus a few reserves, but to perhaps win away at Castleford. I don't think that's unfair. People say you would say that.
I think that's if you were a bookie, those were the odds you would be given.
The main event of the day, of course, was the 1895 Cup final because it's on last, and that's how things work.
Did you wear your hat?
I didn't wear my hat. No, no. I mean, you saw me. I moved to sit in front of
Kept
you.
getting it out, but you kept putting it away again.
I'm a professional, Phil, as opposed to some people who go to sit in press boxes. Um, Wakefield won as expected. I mean, the game played out in front of us as you'd expect. I missed the opening try for Sheffield, so as soon as I got back up, it was all coming up Millhouse. And again, as you mentioned at the start of the program, full-time team versus part-time team. I don't think anyone can be surprised by the result. Sheffield talking about they were disappointed with their performance, but I think it's difficult as I say neutral, but sitting in the press box you are. It was difficult to say Sheffield were poor in a sense. I don't think it'd be fair to categorise them as that.
No, I think that again, Wakefield ensured that when they had the ball in the second half and they were scoring off virtually every play, there was no way Sheffield were going to come back into it. I thought again a sideline observation. I, all in the division, but what we saw it close up was the physical disparity between the two teams. Now I know that sometimes you look bigger if you wear white. But as the game wore on, and Sheffield knew they were not going to win it, it was already maybe 26 or 36, and they certainly weren't going to come back from that. The wave of physicality coming at them, even what struck me was out wide. When Josh Griffin was scoring his tries, rampage. I would commend your anybody that hasn't seen it yet, because he is one of the great characters of the sport, one of the most honest players you can ever come across. And he was saying again how much playing at Wembley at the twilight don't take this game away from Wembley. There was a try that he scored. You look down at the pitch and there were 5 Sheffield players like his wake. Not that they'd missed the tackle, but he'd absolutely busted through them, and it was in bowling. The skittles were all down, and he'd scored a strike. And it struck you then that that's the difference between training every day and trying 2 or 3 times a week. And I couldn't fault Sheffield for anything that they tried to do. And I suspect that again, I didn't see very much of the first half because I was trying to get an elusive interview with Abbas Miski. There was a try scored just on half time that came off the back of a Sheffield error, and the try at the start of the second half came from a Sheffield offload that was never on. It was in their own quarter, so even if it had come off, they weren't going to be advancing particularly far up the field. That was a difference. There was an absolute ruthlessness about Wakefield, and what I think was enjoyable for the neutral, which clearly one of us was the reaction of those Wakefield fans, because they had travelled down in huge numbers. I've seen estimates of we think there were at least 7,000 of them there. There were 24 coaches that we know left Wakefield, and I think to see them with the sun shining on them as it went down at the stadium, and them having such a good time when it's 1979 since they were there, 1963 since they last won everything. Tell me that wasn't an important day for Wakefield. I didn't see their homecoming, but I gather beer was drunk, and a good time was an open top bus as you'd suggested. I'm not sure, but yeah, they were fantastic, and they behaved with decorum. They were respectful of the occasion. Again, it's not the trophy this year.
Do you think the owner will remember the conversation we had in the tunnel afterwards about open top buses and such? And where is the trophy cabinet? Just one slight negative. The Wakefield fans, and it's a minority, criticising how many people Sheffield brought. Wind your necks in. Remember where you've come from. Very, very, very recently.
And I think was day and the team. And if there were 1,200, 50, I don't know. I genuinely don't know how many were there.
Well done to Sheffield's fans who turned up and made noise, and well done to the Sheffield Organisation, there's a very Americanism. Well organised. In the mix
the volunteers are great, and they give you the information that you need, and I think it is a club that's going places, and they should be commended for that, not derided.
As Mark Aston said in the build-up, they do pretty much every facet of the game, and there are some Super League clubs who don't. And it was a leading question when I asked him, well, why don't they? But it's a fair leading question, because why do Sheffield? They've got 2 women's teams.
Absolutely.
That's a lot of development work there.
About their wheelchair team as well.
So they're a club doing things right on and off the pitch, because obviously near the top end of the championship, despite being a part-time team. And I think they've learned the lesson of going full-time when they did a few years ago, and it obviously was a complete nightmare. But hopefully the planning for the new stadium goes ahead, and they get their permanent, proper, forever home, to use that modern phrase, and they go on from there. For Wakefield, it's a matter of, well, they've got the other job to do now. This is why the players don't want the open top bus, because this is not the be all and end all. For the likes of me, winning at Wembley is some kind of dream. I mean, it didn't feel like it at the time because I was working, but
But we shouldn't underestimate that there are IMG points attached to that as well, and on the playing side of how that's calculated, it is important for them to win at Wembley. And you never know; it might be that half a point that they got yet on Saturday that is the difference between taking the place of a side and not.
You can have Darryl Powell holding up the 1895 Cup on the open top bus, and Matt Ellis with half an IMG point written on a big board. So if fans can start taking IMG related signs to games, that would be very good. So that was Wembley. I mean, on the schools final as well. Have you found out the score? Has it been confirmed in the schools final?
It's been confirmed as 26-6, even though there was some conjecture as to whether it was 26-4, but it wasn't. It was 26-6. And apparently, I've seen the highlights of the tries, because again, it's played at 10 o'clock in the morning when the stadium's actually shut, apart from the parents. Great try and a magnificent game, apparently, by Kevin Brown's son. So highly appropriate. It turned out that Orrell won the Year 7 game, Stephen Mullaney game, and somebody who played for Wigan as a professional, their son was player of the match. Kyle Amor's son as well was in that winning team. So yes, I'd love to see more of it, and I think your suggestion about where that game should be played and in what format is one of the best things I heard over the weekend.
Oh, we've got this problem, haven't we, where we all the national schools competitions, as I understand, they're 80 minutes long, aren't they? So it would be daft to have the Year 7 final as not 80 minutes long when all the others are, and but where does it fit in the day is difficult. And of course, it didn't used to be the final of a competition. It used to be a 15-minute curtain raiser each way, or whatever it was. It wasn't a full game, but it was over the full pitch at Wembley. But it's how you fit that in with everything that goes on, and how you structure that. I don't know how you do that, but it obviously has a place on the day, but how you fit it in is the question.
Well, I think you do reward 2 schools at that level. The 2 that get to the Year 7 final can still the schools day that we have, which is at Featherstone or wherever. It used to be the day before somewhere in London, but now it isn't. It's a different time in the calendar. So those 2 sides are all St Peter and a school from Cardiff. I'm not going to disrespect by trying to pronounce their name. They are a great rugby league school, and I'm not going to demean them in any way whatsoever. They could play each other wherever the school's final is for the trophy, as part of that day. But now find a way to get 2 schools at Year 7 to Wembley to play a 15-minute game at half-time in a men's game when there are 65,000 people in the stadium. And it'd be a great day for the kids. They'll remember it for the rest of their lives, and it'll showcase their talents. And I know we have to have singers and dancers and disc jockeys on at half. You don't have the kids game, and I say kids, it's a Year 7 game at half time, and give them the 15 minutes in the sun that they deserve. It'll mean more to them than it will, and it may well be its composite team. It could be Northwest schools against Welsh schools. I don't care who it is, but yeah, take it out of 10 o'clock when there's nobody there. I mean, the media weren't even allowed into the stadium until, was it quarter to 11? By the time you've gone through security, 5 past 10, past 11, game's finished. We can't report on something if something amazing happens if we're not in there. And yes, you could have got accreditation to do the kids' game, but it's quite a long day when you're doing three, adult games as well.
Big fan of people who suggest, well, why don't we start at 2 o'clock or something? So you've got the final one starting at 8 o'clock now. You've got people work at Wembley; they can't be there all night.
You're dictated by the television company. We don't decide the kickoff times; they do. So that's why the women's teams kicked off at quarter to 12, because that was the slot on BBC Two that they were given. So don't complain about the number of people that watch. If you want to change the kickoff time from the one that the broadcaster wants to give you so that the maximum amount of people can watch.
Why?
Good,
what?
Good figures, by the way.
Yeah, it seems so, doesn't it? Which is good. With all
12% of the audience watched the men's game. It's not about the numbers; it's about the percentage of the audience that's available. 12% with a peak of 15%, and the women, was it 5%? Yeah, they're good figures.
I had to try to explain to John Davidson why people in this country are too lazy. That you have to have things on BBC One, because even one button up is too much work for a lot of people. So, well, we have to explain a lot of things to Australians, though, because
they've got a problem with language. Talking of Australians, I think we should mention State of Origin.
It was quite good, wasn't it?
Oh, I mean, I think we're spoilt sometimes with the ability to. These games were mythic and folklore, and you'd run down to the video shop to get the highlights a week after it had happened in the days when it started. But now we got an hour's build up before the men's game on Sky. We got all of the analysis that I love. I don't think we see enough of it. I think Sky do a great job, and but not to the depth that we got on Origin. But the men's game was really interesting with the sending off. I thought New South Wales for the first 20 minutes of the second half with a player down put up a great shift, which again makes you excited about the next two games. I think there was a bit of a stamp of Michael Maguire on that. Perhaps spent a bit too long readjusting his team to cover for the hole that there was, because Queensland scored 2 tries exactly where Swaley would have been. But the way Queensland finished the game, which tends to happen when you've, monstered your opposition when they've had a player down, and the best teams win late on. Played some great rugby, and that series is set up. But the highlight for me this week has been watching the women's State of Origin. That was just the most astonishing game on Thursday afternoon. Thursday morning into afternoon over here. Again, the first time they've had a 3-match series, and as they sat down and said, "Well, we gave you 1 game, and now we've given you 2 games, and we think we'll give you 3 games." Right, it goes to the 3rd game. Fantastic. That's what you want. Everybody now is going to be turning up at Townsville, tuning in to see how this series ends. But I don't think I've seen a game where for 70 minutes a team absolutely dominates, and then you look at the score on 80 minutes and the other team's won. And how in torrential rain you managed to kick a drop goal to win the match. Astonishing. And short kickoffs work. That's the other thing that I learned.
Does Ian Blease like short kickoffs?
Well, that's the other story, I suppose, isn't it, this week, that Leeds have unveiled their sporting director is Ian Blease. He doesn't start till next Monday. He's outlined as best he can what he hopes to do, bearing in mind that he technically hasn't taken the job yet. And he said all the right things, that it's going to take time. He's not there to make change overnight. He's going to be supportive of what's currently there. It's an interesting appointment, and as I said, it's one of those that the proof of its pudding will be in a fair way down the line.
Yeah, look forward to those 5 things Ian Blease is going to do as Leeds' sporting director articles coming to you very soon on the internet, if they're not there already. There's something else I was going to mention that happened in the last week, but because Wembley dominates everything, I've just completely forgotten everything that goes on. Ireland, which I was going to mention but wasn't the thing, won the Celtic Cup. at the
Yep.
weekend in wheelchair rugby league, which is
Hosted
great
it
news.
as well, which is probably more important. That's the first time there's been wheelchair on the island, in Ireland at Galway, and most of their team were domestic players, and they haven't even yet got a domestic competition. So they were all they played wheelchair hurling apparently, which I didn't know existed, and basketball.
I want to watch wheelchair hurling now. I mean, hurling and
It's not hurling. It's not hurling a wheelchair.
no,
It's hurling in a wheelchair.
well, they're expensive. You don't want to do that, would you? But Gaelic football and hurling, you watch them and think, what's going on here? I'll ask Brian Carney about it next time you see him. Can you remember what else has happened this week? Because I think it's kind of been a bit of a blur, hasn't it? Because everything, obviously, from last Sunday onwards, has been a lot of talk about Rob Burrow and his legacy.
John Cartwright told, was that this week or was that last week? Did we talk about that? Anyway, John Cartwright's going to talk. Yeah, I think we did.
Oh, we did, yeah, because John talked about it a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, I was asleep when John was talking, which often happens.
I'm just trying to think of anything that's happened, and I'm sure people will jump into the comments and say, "Well, this happened and that happened," but I can't remember.
Edison have got a new director.
Yep, York.
Good.
Mark Applegath. We saw him there on Saturday. He was doing the commentary for Radio Leeds, and there he was. He's the new York head coach because Andrew Henderson has got some head of something or other job.
Development and rugby.
Which reminds me, because I've mentioned Radio Leeds, I was listening to it yesterday by accident, and Dodgy was not on because it was raining, and they had as a guest Courtney Winfield Hill, who I didn't realise also has a job in cricket.
Oh yeah, she's a coach of the Diamonds, isn't she?
Oh, no, she's a scout now for the ECB. She's moved away from the Diamonds, yeah. So she was talking about what she looks for in players, and this is going back to when you were talking about Bevan French earlier, and we moved on to something else. So I forgot. The ECB, in their scouting, they're looking for players who are game changers. So maybe that must be what they're looking for in cricket. I assume that's the same in rugby league. You're looking for players who can change a game with whatever they do in their brains and with their feet and hands. So it was just interesting to listen to her not talk about rugby league for a bit. She was half shirts for the final, which I don't know about that. She said hello to me anyway, so I assume she knows who I am. So that was nice.
Well, he was celeb.
Yeah, but you didn't see me, jumping on the Wakefield bandwagon, did you? I wasn't able to go and get pictures with.
I wouldn't know.
But where's Jane McDonald? Where's she? Is she going to be at the next home game for Wakefield? This week's fixtures, because everything's back to normal now. League One: Cornwall, Rochdale, Hunslet Midlands, Newcastle, Oldham, and North Wales, Workington. So a week off for Keighley. They're in a fight with Martina Navratilova.
Yes, if you haven't seen that on social media, look it up just for the smile it'll bring you. I don't know who won, by the way, but
next week it's Halifax versus Tim Henman. Looking forward to that one. Speaking of Halifax, they're at Barrow in the Championship. Toulouse versus Doncaster. Dewsbury, York. Sheffield, Featherstone. Swinton, Batley. Whitehaven, Bradford. And Widnes versus Wakefield, whoever's sober by that point.
That's a big game, isn't it? The top two playing each other. That will be that'll be worth. If you're in the area, go watch Widnes Wakefield. And it's probably why Wakefield won't rotate their squad too much. That's a big game.
Then in Super League, 3 games on Friday night: Castleford, Wigan, Hull KR, Huddersfield, Warrington, Salford, which is the main TV game. Saturday, Hull, Leeds, Catalans, Lee, and then on Sunday, London versus St Helens at the Stoop.
Yeah, the McCarthy Scarsbrook
derby.
Well,
you got Sheffield Featherstone, which is the Mark Aston derby this week, haven't you? Although I don't know if either party would necessarily want to be known as that. It'll be interesting to see how York go under Mark Applegath. Obviously, some people still blame him for Wakefield's relegation, but what a terrible hand of cards he was dealt at the start of last year.
I think it was fitting that obviously he was in the Wakefield press conference after the game because he was working there, as you say, and all of the 3 people on the top table, Luke Gale, Matty Ashurst and Darryl Powell all paid tribute to him when they saw him on the front row. And, that wasn't stage managed in any way whatsoever.
So generally, it seems a strange thing to say, but it was our assumption on it was our summation on the day, and I think it remains this way now. Wembley was a good event. The rugby was a bit meh, but as a day, it was good. And fingers crossed it will be again next year.
Something as a sport we should be proud of. And it's up to other teams to be as good as St Helens women, Wigan men, and Wakefield, who may never again play in the 1895 Cup.
I'm not going to say never play at Wembley again. Well, there's a good chance of that because I've got to 44 and I haven't played there until now. I'm a 43. That's all there. I can't remember. I was able to at the end get a moment just to sit in the posh seats on my own for a bit and collect my thoughts. And slightly emotional. I wasn't up until that point. I thought Abide With Me would get me in the first game, and it didn't for some reason. But at the end, when I was just able to take a moment, it was because I expected to win, so it wasn't there wasn't the drama, but
that's why it has to be at Wembley, because I don't think you'd have had that same moment of reflection, even in victory, if you'd have been, I don't know, at the Halliwell Jones Stadium.
No, certainly not for the people who, you would have liked to have been there but couldn't be there,
especially then
watching on somewhere. Phil, thank you very much. Magazine's out this week.
Friday in the shops, hopefully Thursday for subscribers. There is a Rob Burrow thread throughout, as you would expect. I don't think anybody can pay sufficient tribute to him, but we've tried. And obviously all of Wembley and Rugby League, wherever it's played in the world.
So look out for that in your newsagent. So if you subscribe, if you haven't subscribed, the details are on the bottom of the video, and you'll find them online anyway at scratchingsabpublishing.com. So just search for it. We'll be back next week with more exciting Rugby League. Who knows? We might even be live. You never know. You'll find out when we do next week. Have a good one.